musician. I went to school for that, and then, which is what I wanted to do. My father was an electrical engineer, and he worked for Hughes Aircraft in the aerospace department, and so our garage was sort of like a, there was oscilloscopes, and it was like a tech shop in there, and like his idea of a good birthday present was, let's build an amplifier from this kit, or something, you know what I mean? And so I had that, and he of course was pushing me into a similar type thing, without pushing. And so I ended up when I was at university, taking a class in electronic music, which was just sort of starting to be, more mainstream and less, craft work or whatever. And I sort of put two and two together, I can take this world of knobs and dials and match it with this world of, music that I like, and it sort of, it seemed to make sense. So then I started, making cappuccinos, or being the tea boy, as you'd say, over in Britain. And then I ended up working at Cherokee Studios, which is also another sad story of shut. Yeah, but yeah, I worked there. That was my first gig, and I basically talked my way into an engineering gig when I had no prior experience, and learned a whole heck of a lot in a very short period of time, because the owners there were very old school in their, and even though things were in that transition from analog world to digital world, they still were very much in the analog realm and did stuff very much in an old school, by the book way, and it was good. I mean, I think the idea of, you get up in the morning, and then during the course of the day, at the end of the day, you look back and something's been created that wasn't there before. It's just, instead of sort of shifting papers around, or I mean, there's a certain satisfaction in doing something. I mean, whether it's in the studio or not, whether you're just you're planting tomatoes in your garden or something, but the collaborative aspect of it is great when everybody's excited about something that exists now that was just sort of in somebody's head at the beginning of the day. And the thing that I do that always helps me out and is I always put up way more mics than I'm going to actually use. And the reason is because you have those choices, and then but I commit and don't print a bazillion tracks. Always a balancing job between you want to make sure that you put up something that works, because you don't want to miss a great performance, and not have captured it properly. But you don't want to just always go to the same, sort of like, in this situation, I reach for this mic, I reach for this pre, this compressor, whatever. Giving yourself too many options as things roll along, which is one of the great pitfalls of recording into Pro Tools. It just confuses the issue down the line. I mean, getting back to working with Don Gaiman, it was funny, we'd always record everything on one 24-track. And even this was long past the point where you could lock up a second machine or be using a 48-track or something like that. We'd still be using the one, and I would be standing there, and he'd be telling the guys in the band, if you want to add that, conga part in the bridge, what are you going to lose? And they'd be like, well, can't we just lock up a second machine? And he'd be like, well, that's not the point. Like, there isn't enough room for a new part. So if you're going to add this, you have to take this away. And it was always, he was about making decisions on the spot. And I mean, that, I think it keeps you moving forward towards whatever initial goal you had, instead of getting sidetracked on, when you get to the mix. Oh, what does it sound like if we, listen to this one room mic, or whatever, that we should have mixed in with everything else when the time was there, Record a bunch of tracks. It's sounding great, you have some effects going, this and that, maybe some outboard stuff that's not in the computer, whatever. Or maybe it's running through the board or running through a compressor, and you're like, that sounds great. Print it, And then, pretend that you wipe the tracks and just disable them and hide them and forget that they're there, But know, somewhere behind a locked key in the back of your mind, that you could go back if you need to. And I've been mixing all the score for CSI Miami for the last 3 seasons, I think.
Wow.
Which is, it's fun because it's very fun music that I have a lot of leeway to do what I want with. It's very industrial, and the composer Jeff Cardoni is brilliant, and it's a fun collaborative thing. So I picked up that gig, which I wouldn't have even thought of doing really before, even if it was offered. I don't think, maybe 5-6 years ago or something. But now, so that, I mean, I've been doing that, and more people that I worked with that only did music for music are now also doing music for film, like Atticus Ross, who produces with for Nine Inch Nails and co-writes stuff. He's now doing a film with the Hughes brothers, and he wasn't doing that before. He was doing music for music's sake. He had his own band, 12 Rounds, and he was a music guy for music. And now he's branched off into the film business as well, because it's now all becoming one. I think it's not as specific, like, oh, you're a music guy, you're a film composer guy. It's kind of like, oh, you're a music guy, therefore you do music for music's sake, and music for film and TV, and music for webcasts, and music is music. The good and the bad of the sound for film is it's always done last, at the last possible second, and in a rush, because you can't really do the music until the picture's locked. But the picture's always locked. They push it back, they're editing, they're fixing, but they never change the dub date, which is the date when everything comes together. Right. Because there's so many people involved, and it's such an expensive process, and they've secured people in advance for this date, where it all has to happen. It usually takes a week. But that they don't want to push the dub, because if they end up pushing that day or that week, they'll have to push it 2 months. And because the studio's all geared up for the release of the film, pushing that 2 months actually screws up the release. So it's like, once they've set the dub date, it's really set in stone, unless something really terrible happens. So the music's always rushed, which is kind of good in some way, because you're forced to to make things happen, and not get too precious about stuff, and just get down to work instead of belaboring it. But other times you really wish you had more time to really get it right. I mean, I think it's just human nature to procrastinate. If you have the time, you'll use it. I mean, if you had $100, you'd probably spend it. If you had 10, you'd spend that too. But you'd much rather have the 100, and you'd much rather have the more time. But will you make something better with more time? I mean, I would argue probably not. Something different, perhaps. There's experimentation that goes with the process. Constant, really. A constant learning of... I mean, pretty much everything I learned in the first 5 years of being an engineer, I don't even use anymore. You know what I mean? Or things that people used to hire me for. Like, I used to get hired to do vocal sessions because I was an expert puncher, on an old analog tape machine. You know what I mean? And I could comp vocals together from 5 tracks, and make it seamless, and there's an art to it, and now it's, now I drag between tracks and Pro Tools. It seems that every person that hires me, if I do end up finding out what the reason behind it all was, it seems to be something completely different, I mean, and I think I probably have one of the most eclectic discographies out there,
I noticed that.
I mean, it's like, within the last 2 years, I've recorded 9 Inch Nails, and I produced a jazz record. So, I don't know what it is, I think it's more a competence and an attitude, and making everyone comfortable and getting good results. I mean,